You're listening to the World Footie Net podcast. Welcome to the World Footie Net podcast. You can email us at podcast@worldfootie.net or alternatively, post your comments on the World Footie Net Facebook page.
Hello again, this is Hooligan J. Broome with World Footie Net podcast number 32. We have a very special guest, Ted Westervelt. How are you doing today, Ted?
Good. How are you, Hooligan?
I am well. We have some topics today to discuss, and Ted has been pretty vocal on them. So we're just going to get right into it. Ted, first question I have for you is why does the MLS refuse to share the spotlight or even acknowledge other American leagues? And why do they seem to refuse to work together? What are your thoughts on this?
I think a lot of it has to do with just the way the U.S. pro sports model is. I mean, you look at NFL or Major League Baseball, and these guys aren't good at recognizing other leagues or recognizing history that took place in any other leagues. And I think it's just kind of a symptom of our system, for lack of a better term. MLS wants to be the standard for soccer. They want to be the ones that say, we did this right, everybody else did it wrong. And I think part of that is, taking the history and folding it in ways that make MLS look good. And they have the power and the wherewithal to do that. And it seems to me that they're really pushing that agenda.
I mean, do you think that it has to do, going into history a little bit, in this country, it's notorious that there might be a couple of what we would consider pro in the game leagues going on, and there's always infighting between these leagues. They never seem to be able to work together. Do you think maybe MLS looked at that from the beginning and said, these leagues in existence already just can't get it together. We're just going to go over here and start our own thing. You think it evolved out of that, or
I think so. I mean, I would take it to the next step and say MLS learned a lot of the wrong lessons from the past century of soccer in the U.S. And of course, for me, core to that is the promotion relegation issue and independent clubs. But instead of noticing the coincidence between the failures of U.S. club soccer and our failure to adopt the system that the rest of the world uses for the game, they decided the only way to knock out this infighting, which for me is a symptom of closed leagues, and it goes all the way back to the 1920s. They just decided that they would take over the system, basically. And I think U.S. soccer gave them the power to basically do that and say, we are now in charge of soccer in the United States, and we're going to put in a hierarchy that simply hasn't been there before, and we're going to do everything we can to keep that hierarchy intact by just using our power and just using our connections in the sports world and using that to quell any of the disputes that, you're right, have sunk American club soccer for 80 years.
Yeah, I wonder why they just refuse. I mean, it's starting to break in now. I mean, we have footballers like Tyler Ruthven here that's moved from NASL up to the Red Bulls and now starting. And I mean, just an excellent player and all around good guy, Johnny Steele, that played for the Carolina Railhawks last year, has moved to Real Salt Lake. And I don't really follow MLS too close, but, when it pops up that this guy is, banging goals in, I look at that and I go, overall, do they just not get it? Is the money too big, all said and done, and the good old boy network too entrenched to ever change it?
It's funny. Right before I got on today, I was looking at a little Twitter piece that somebody sent over on the top, say, 500 richest sports teams in the world and how they spend their money, and noticed that LA Galaxy is something like 17 million spends 17 million on players, and you take that away and fit it into the DP system, and it looks to me like just doing the quick math, that 3 players are getting 15 million of that, and the rest of the guys are splitting about 1.6. And it just, I mean, really, Robbie Keane and David Beckham and Landon Donovan are that good? Or is this just another piece of evidence of, well, there's something going on here, and there's some kind of, marketing scheme here that's somehow not meshing very well with developing soccer to the American potential?
Well, I mean, let's look at it. You say LA Galaxy, the MLS is paying that because these clubs don't operate independently. They don't float. They don't have budgets. The MLS has a budget, and they decide, which is just all wrong in my book. Not even the throw ball does it. But they look at a team like Colorado and they go, they're kind of weak. This player retired. This one decided not to renew his contract and went to play in a real league in Mexico where he can actually play to his potential. Mm-hmm. And, this one went to Europe.
And where a manager can actually build a team based upon, his needs and his philosophies and not worry about some DP system and some salary caps out there that are forcing his hand or doing whatever, including the league micromanagement on those other levels he talked about. It's absurd.
Well, right. In all that, not only does that go to an argument for promotion and relegation of that it would make the game more compelling, because if just like Rangers in Scotland right now, if Kansas City decided to spend outside of their limits, well, you know what? They get a 10-point deduction. They drop in the table, probably get relegated, and it leaves room for, a San Antonio Scorpions that play well their first year. Just as an example, maybe they get out of the gate and they can pop up.
Right.
And it grows the game overall. Right. And not only, and it drops Kansas City, and it gives Kansas City a time to readjust themselves.
Exactly. I mean, in our market, the Scotland comparisons are great. I love it when people use Scotland as sort of as an example of how, promotion relegation breaks down. And they forget that the U.S. market is 100 times bigger than Scotland's. And, just the under – I don't know if you guys saw that recent poll ESPN did about soccer in the U.S., but seeing that in the under 23 segment, soccer is second only to NFL, professional soccer is second only to NFL. Right. I mean, that segment right there is bigger than all the fans in Scotland. It's probably bigger than all the fans in the UK population-wise. I mean, the foundation is there to actually move this thing forward. I mean, right now.
Well, and we may differ a little bit on thoughts of. I read an article that was put out maybe 2010, but it basically gave up a model for instituting promotion relegation here, and I kind of liked it rather than just moving to a straight European model. I say European, the way the rest of the world works.
The planet.
Yeah.
I catch myself doing that too, though. I say, oh, that's the European model. No, not really. It's basically the model everywhere else. In fact, 100% of our closed soccer leagues of unlimited clubs have failed. Everywhere else does it that way, and certainly you could make the argument that the only system that sustains unlimited soccer clubs is a system of open leagues and promotion relegation.
Well, exactly, and it grows the game. But outside of that, just to make it palatable and recognizable to the U.S. sports fan, this gentleman suggested, the first year you start in on it, you take the bottom MLS team, and you have a 2-leg home and away playoff against the top NASL team. And if the MLS team on aggregate or just outright wins, makes it, they get to stay put. Mm-hmm. NASL team stays put. If they lose, they drop, NASL team moves up. Right. And I think that's something more familiar and palatable. And then as time goes on, you make it, the very bottom team in MLS just automatically drops. That's just a done deal. And then the next team above that does the playoff until you get to that 3 you get everyone used to it.
Right.
wade into the water slowly.
Right.
Something like that. And, you do that all the way down to the USL, to the PDL, as low as you want to go.
I mean, for me, it's all about unlimited clubs. I mean, and getting from here to there, unlimited clubs includes promotion relegation, obviously, because the only way to unlimit every club in the U.S. is via that open system where, nobody's telling you which leagues what league you can play in. You play to whatever level you can play to. So,
right.
And for me, it's whatever vehicle to get there that gets us there that doesn't take, like Don Garber says, like 50 years, because some of us don't have 50 years, basically.
Well, and let's dovetail that. Don Garber, just real quickly, probably, and from everything that I read, great businessman.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't know the sport. In my whole thing is, yes, Don Garber actually, for the MLS as a league, I have to give him respect due. He really has brought it along from the guy he inherited it from. Has he done everything right? Well, that's a matter of opinion. People like us would say no. Others would say he's done great. I think the issue with him is it's time for some new blood. Let him take care of the business side of it, because he seems to handle, the funds pretty well.
Yeah.
He hasn't bankrupted the league, and we don't hear about, corruption in it. So
I mean, you can't call the man irresponsible,
Right. And so give respect where respect is due. But as far as growing the game, which people like us are concerned with,
yes,
time for some new blood.
Yes.
But wrapping that up and dovetailing in, why do you think the U.S. Open Cup is really all said and done not open, nor is it promoted at all?
It's another symptom. It's another symptom of the way U.S. sports are run. I mean, no professional league wants to have to play in a tournament that they have to play with minor league teams. I mean, I think it's just part of that culture. And I mean, culture is a word that gets really overused in this world, especially. You could say, well, the culture isn't ready and fans don't get it and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, I think this culture is made up of about 200 guys who are U.S. pro sports owners. And it's that culture that doesn't really – U.S. Open Cup, it's all kind of holding their nose and, gosh, I mean – God bless Seattle for caring about the U.S. Open Cup, and God bless the Pacific Northwest, because I think they were getting to the point where they were going to be able to say, you know what, this U.S. Open Cup thing just isn't really working out. It's just, you're doing these games and there's nobody coming, and never mind, like you and I both know, that They didn't spend a dime promoting the tournament.
Right.
And I mean, it's such a huge, the wealth of legacy in that tournament, it goes beyond almost. It's as deep as any in the world, really. I mean, unless you go to the FA Cup, it's tough to come up with another cup of that nature, an Open Cup in that framework that has more legacy than the U.S. Open Cup. And I mean, it just sits there and it's just unused. It's like gold, and it just doesn't get addressed.
Well, there's about 4 teams really in the MLS that care. Vancouver, Toronto, Portland, Seattle. And that's because the culture is different there. And culture may be an overused word, but those are obviously 2 of them are Canadian, so they're not American attitudes at all.
Right.
And then those 2 Northwest cities, for anyone that's ever been there, it's a completely different vibe from the rest of the country.
And the interesting about that too is that the NASL versions of those teams didn't do U.S. Open Cup, so it's really cool to see the Northwest care about this tournament,
right?
Because it really wasn't part of that Sounder Timber legacy that really, for all intents and purposes, may have saved MLS.
Well, yeah, and I mean, me having lived in Portland before the Timbers got there, I mean, those people there were rabid before they even got the MLS bug.
Yeah.
I mean, they were going out and watching and filling stadiums before that was even a dream to anyone.
I mean, it was big enough up there that I was doing some research for some other projects, and Manchester City came to the U.S. in '86, right after the collapse of NASL, and there were only 4 outdoor U.S. pro teams left.
Right.
And they came to play in Seattle. I mean, that's a long trip for Man City. There must have been something going on there. I mean, it was an impressive. I was impressed to find out that Man City did a tour basically in the wreckage of NASL and went to Seattle.
Right. Well, I mean, they all that stuff filled the void for a while.
Yes.
Because there are people like us that, I don't hate other sports per se. They're just not very interesting to me. Maybe outside of some ice hockey, but I'm a footy fan.
The more research I did on American pro sports and how stilted it can get, and how the local market and how to keep the leagues alive by imposing parity and competitive balance and all of that nonsense, just really, that's what sparked me as a soccer fan. That and watching Fulham struggle against relegation for a couple years there.
Right.
I mean, that was those. I said, you know what? That's a big piece of. This is a huge missing component. But
yeah. Now with the Open Cup, one of the things that's compelling about the FA Cup, which the Open Cup could do as well, is, national team players are found that way because they get on a broader stage.
Yes.
It opens up the pool of players to exposure, because you could have a PDL kid that ends up playing against, let's say a Red Bull team, because they knock out the USL and the NASL teams that they play against, and you could have a wonder kid on there. You could have, an American Ryan Giggs or something on that team that, because he comes from Podunk, Iowa, and plays on this little team, nobody looks at him.
Yep.
But
it's another
like
venue. That. You're absolutely right. It's another venue for those players out there who may not get noticed otherwise.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's very important to grow that particular cup. I think it's vital to the game in this country. Even if it never becomes the number one sport in this country, I could care less. I just want to see it blossom to its potential, whatever its potential is.
The U.S. is so big that soccer doesn't need to be the most popular sport in the U.S. for us to win a World Cup. It doesn't need to be. And I think MLS gets that. And I think U.S. soccer gets that too. And I think they may even be more optimistic than I am. But yeah, I don't think they're getting us there. But in any case, soccer doesn't need to be. I completely agree with that. And people want to glom onto that. People want to jump on it and they say, well, soccer's not going to be the most, what are you even arguing about? Soccer's never going to be the most important. That doesn't matter. I mean, it can reach its potential. I mean, all I want is for it to reach its potential. And you and I both see that potential it's big enough. It's huge. It's huge.
And that really dovetails into our youth system is so backwards. I mean, it is just so backwards.
Yeah, did you see that Klinsmann, something interesting on Twitter the other day was the Klinsmann apparently, for the first time ever, put all of the youth organization and top to bottom coaches in the same conference room ever. Like there was a video on there, and he basically said it was the first time that had ever happened. And it's kind of like, what?
Well, and I mean, a big part of that is, outside of the Washington, D.C. political fighting and, Arizona, this game concerns us. And this game, basically developmentally wise, is geared, to me, in my eyes, towards middle class and white. I mean, to me, that's
you mean
something
MLS as it's currently constituted?
Well, just the United States Soccer Federation.
Oh yeah.
The pool that we pull from, if you're not white and middle class and can't afford to pay one of these elite academies, the Olympic development people are not going to even look at you. And, that's the line to the national team. And I happen to coach for free on my own time. I look at it as a job, though. I coach these Hispanic kids. In a broader scale, these Hispanic kids are at 9 and 10 years old. They're Americans too, but they don't come from any money, and they're way better. They're way better. They grow up with the game. It's not their default game. It's not mom and dad looking at, Johnny going, oh, Johnny doesn't hit a baseball well and he's not big enough to play the throw ball. Let's sign him up for soccer. There's none of that. That is their game. It's what their parents play. It's what their grandparents play on down the line. And they're better at it, but half these kids never get looked at.
Race has played such an interesting part in U.S. soccer history too, and you take that back and how it's constituted, and it's up until just when I first started yammering about this a couple years back, there were still a few people arguing that soccer failed because it was the immigrant sport in the 1920s, and everybody said it was just a bunch of immigrants that were doing it, and it had that rap, and it's kind of like, if you or your parents weren't immigrants in the 1920s, you were in the minority. I mean, we are an immigrant nation. I mean, and right now the immigration still comes in, and there's a lot of pressure to Americanize and acclimatize, and what's the word I'm looking for here? I can't remember, but assimilate, exactly. Now, and that pressure's there, and it's been there, but and also say that in terms of, we can't have all these ethnically named teams in soccer. That's what hurt it, and and then you have the Boston Celtics and the Washington Redskins, and it's not as if ethnicity hasn't played a role in all of our sports in some way, shape, or form. So it's just all of those arguments that kind of that's one of those arguments that until recently was really buttressed sort of the inability of soccer to catch on, and one of those assumptions that was just completely whacked.
Well, and that's really what I'm looking towards is no matter what society you are anywhere in the world, sport is a part of society.
Yes.
And, soccer happens to be a sport that's universal. Everybody plays it. Mm-hmm. But, the native-born Americans, as it were, they kind of, it's set up, it seems, to where the immigrant populations don't have a voice in the one thing that's universal that they can identify when they get to this country.
Right.
They may not be able to speak English, read English, but they know how to play the footy.
Right.
But we've made it as such to where they can't assimilate in because of money.
Right.
And, a lot of these clubs, I look at kids that have come I'll just tell you my experience. Growing up, started playing footy in 1979. Played at some of the highest levels available in Atlanta at the time until I moved to California. When I got to California and I went out looking for pickup games, I ended up playing pickup games with Hispanic immigrants that, were day laborers. They were out in the field picking fruit, vegetables, painting houses, whatever. Mm-hmm. When I go out on a pitch and, I got my nice Diodora cleats on. I'm ready to play. And these guys are out there in Converse.
Yep.
They don't train, and they're waxing me.
Uh-huh.
I mean, waxing me. And I'm going, wow, what have I missed out on?
Right.
And it was in really my real education in the game came from playing with those guys. And then taking the time to sit down and talk to them, because the footy is a universal language. You may not agree on anything else, politically or otherwise, but you could, anywhere in the world, just about, you can sit down and have a conversation about this game.
Yep. And that conversation's been going on for a long time. I mean, you take your experience, I guarantee people were having that same experience in the 1920s, except the people there, the rough and tumble guys they're playing with on those pitches are Scottish, and they're Hungarians, and they're just other folks from other immigrants from a different time. And it's the same experience. And we've been having that experience now since shoot, it probably, I'm certain it goes back even further than that. Some of those teams in the late 1800s and Fall River and northern New Jersey, and that's what I think that's a core piece of our experience.
Right. I mean, with this, I mean, right now it seems like, the bulk of immigration that we have, is obviously from Spanish-speaking countries. We have a lot of African refugees coming in right now, and we seem to have a large percentage, at least in Atlanta. I don't know where you are and what your percentage is, but Eastern
Denver.
European.
Yeah.
You're in Denver?
Yeah. Well, we have the Hispanic stuff makes me laugh. The Latino kids around here are, those are the kids. I can see that's my experience is going out, and I barely even try to kick a ball anymore, especially when those kids are around, because it's too embarrassing.
Well, right. I mean, and it seems, you're in Denver, and it seems like a lot of our true fan base, would be the Colfax crowd.
Uh-huh.
That comes off that street in Denver. For us here, it's Little 5 Points, Emmett Park.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to be that underground, so to say, crowd that, we don't care about that stuff. But I mean, with those immigrant populations coming in, we're the little guys screaming at the United States Soccer Federation.
There's no clubs reaching down. There's no U.S. clubs reaching down and grabbing those kids. That's the way I look at it. It just the incentive isn't there for MLS to really develop those players and use that resource. And I think part of that is sort of the single entity concept and all that celebrity mentality that goes around the DPs. And well, if we just get Beckham, Keane, and Donovan, and then we can throw, we can just kind of scrabble out the rest of the team with the $1.6 million we got left. That kind of attitude, for whatever reason, it certainly seems to me that they're leaving a lot of those kids on the table.
Well, right. And I mean, that scheme that you're talking about with Beckham, Keane, nobody seems to really notice Thierry Henry, which makes me laugh. But because out of the major players that have come over, I think Thierry Henry is probably, Beckham, because of his lifestyle, may take the main stage. But as far as playing the game, Thierry Henry, he's way more accomplished.
It's funny though. Even Thierry Henry comes over, and I don't know if you guys saw this. I'd have to search my links, but he seemed surprised about the whole salary cap thing. I mean, he came out in the media and said, "What if Barcelona, had to deal with a salary cap? I mean, how could you keep Messi and Iniesta and Xavi on the same team? I mean, how you can't do that with a salary cap." And this was after he had been here for a couple of months. It was almost like some of these guys just don't seem to know what they're getting themselves into.
And they don't. If you, not to diverge too much, but if you read about Thierry Henry, one of the main things that brought him to New York was, he said, I can ride the subway to work. Nobody knows who I am. Mm-hmm. And that's what he does. He rides the subway to train every morning. And nobody has any idea who he is. He's just another face. And for someone that when he goes home to Europe is in the limelight, is a major celebrity, that's probably very appealing to him.
I mean, you got a statue of yourself in London. That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Now, with this huge pool of immigrant kids that we have that can play the game, at a high level, by the time they're 9 or 10, What do you think has to happen to really shake the United States Federation up? Besides, get rid of Sunil, but outside of that, I mean, because I really see, all the stories that I have read about Klinsmann coming in is he kind of said one of his things to come in was, you guys got to get out of my way. You guys got to let me do it correctly, or I'm not going to do it at all. And youth is a big focus for him. Think about it this way, though.
Think about it this way. That dance with Klinsmann went on for a really long time, and I can't imagine there weren't any number of interactions and conversations that sort of had to take place, and how those parties danced and moved together slowly over 2 or 3 years. I'd be really interested to be a fly on the wall to see how that happened, because it seems to me that as much as Klinsmann wanted to come in and shake things up, I think that there is some. It appears to me that there is some reality there that he can only do so much at this point. I mean, he doesn't seem to be the guy that said in the World Cup telecast like that the U.S. soccer pyramid is upside down. I don't hear him saying that stuff, and part of that obviously is because he's now in a position of power, and he's really trying to make some changes, and he can't be the outsider calling in and criticizing. I mean, it's his time, and he's got to do something about this, and he can't just be tearing things apart. He's got to try to build stuff. But I think there are constraints on Jurgen, and I hope that I'm rooting for him like anybody else to shake things up, but I wonder if he's decided he can only go so far.
Well, I'm sure he has. I mean, that's just a reality of the situation, right, as we all know. But on the other side of that, look kind of what he said about Lando. Like, I'm not calling you again. I called you once. You didn't show up. But that's
when I start to believe him again when he says that stuff, for sure.
Well, because that's the mentality. Like, look, dude, if it's not important to you, you're not important to me.
You're not a DP on my team. That's a good thing. He doesn't have DPs.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, and not that I'm putting any of this on Klinsmann's head, because I know all the decision-making process about who he's bringing is probably not been thrown completely on his plate yet. He's probably not as in control as he would like to be, and that's just the silly political mess that exists here.
And I think
we got guys like Hercules Gomez,
yes,
who's unreal. Why isn't he playing on the national team all the time? Right. And it just leaves me with question marks.
It seemed to me going into the whole Klinsmann decision, if I had to take a stab at it, I would say that Don Garber was probably not that comfortable with Klinsmann, because I think that they had a nice system going with Bradley and to some degree Arena that, they're inside guys. They've been through the system. They know they're interested in helping with MLS. They've got friends in MLS, and I think that there was and not that Klinsmann doesn't have this pressure, but it seemed some of Bradley's personnel choices certainly seemed to be the result of texts from Don Garber every once in a while, and I think of Robbie Finley when I say that.
Right.
But when the U.S. is in the 10 World Cup team, when it's dwindling down and there's only about 4 MLS players left on the squad, I mean, you can bet Don Garber's making calls to Bob Bradley saying, we can't lose anybody else here. You're gonna, we need guys on this team from MLS, and not that Klinsmann's not under that pressure, but I want to hope somewhere that he's going to be a little bit more independent than that. But jury's still out, and I think you're right. It is early, and it's a little too early to judge.
Right. Well, Ted, for now, we're going to have to leave it there. We hope to have you on again soon, and we'll get back into it. It's been a great conversation. Thank you for joining us.
I appreciate it.
All right.